My name's Mike. For those of you that may not already know that, probably seen me up on stage. It's good to be back again. I got to do this in October, so I thank you for not submitting a bunch of horrible feedback to Pastor Rudy, so I can do this again. If you don't know me very well or don't know my family, I did want to show you a picture of my family. Aww. Okay, good. Yeah, we're a really good-looking bunch. So let me introduce you. That lovely thing over there, that's my wife, Maggie. We'll be celebrating 13 years of marriage next month, which is pretty cool. Yeah. I honestly don't know how I got so blessed to have such a talented, beautiful woman by my side, but I don't question the blessing. I just choose to accept it. On the other side, though, these are my two boys. This over here on your left is Asher, my 8-year-old, and then Bennett, my 5-year-old. And it's kind of funny when I tell people that I have an 8 and a 5-year-old for the first time. Most people, their reaction is like, oh, such a precious age. And I'm just kind of like, have you ever had an 8 and a 5-year-old before? I mean, you guys can relate, those of you in the room. Like, they fight and they whine constantly. Their emotions are through the roof. They test my boundaries at every corner. It's like, dinner's ready. They're like, I'm not hungry. And then like 2 minutes after dinner, it's like, I'm hungry. Can I have a snack? No, like that sort of stuff. So, but when people say that, I smile and I nod and like, yeah, they're precious. that sort of thing. But seriously, I love them. They mean the world to me. I'd do anything for them. But one of our sons specifically, and I'm not going to out this particular child, but if you know me and my family, you know who I'm talking about right away. Anyway, one of my sons, my wife and I joked that we should have named him Murphy, after Murphy's Law. You guys know Murphy's Law? Anything that can go wrong will go wrong, right? That's this child. So this is the child examples that will build a Lego masterpiece, whether it's a building or a car or something, and as he's carrying it into the living room to show it to you, inevitably right before it gets there, you hear, oopsie, and it shatters all over the ground. That's the key word in our house when we know Murphy's about to strike, by the way, is oopsie. Anyway, so it's the same child that you give a quarter to, and it ends up minutes later in the ventilation of your lawnmower. That is hard to get out. I just want to let you guys know, firsthand experience. It's the same child that reads a book at the dinner table and needs to go to the bathroom or something. No bookmark, no problem. Just grab a glass of milk and wedge it in there and shut the book. And the list goes on and on and on. And they tell me that these stories will be endearing someday. So, anyways, but why do I tell you this? Because through all of this stuff, 4 common words get uttered in my household by my wife and I. What were you thinking? Right? Those of your parents can relate. What were you thinking? Maybe not. You don't have to be parents. You could just know someone like, what are you thinking? So we do that, right? Kids, friends, family members, whatever. What are you thinking? And another thing, like, I don't understand what you're doing. If he's in the middle of it, he'll be like, can I have the pair of scissors? Why? I just need them. Or like what? Like, and then you see what he's doing, and you're like, I don't understand it. So, looping this around because we're in church. I just went off on a parenting venting moment there. That's what you guys just got to see. We do that with Jesus really often, though, right? We have these moments in our lives where we're like, I don't understand what you're doing. I don't get it. I don't know why you aren't interceding here. I've asked for things, and I'm not seeing you show up. I don't understand what you're doing. And I can't stand up here and tell you that I understand now why God chooses to do the things that he does, or sometimes not do. Does. I don't know. Anyway. But hopefully what we're going to learn here, we're going to be opening up, if you guys want to, Mark chapter 5. And we didn't have this in the first service, but we'll have some slides up here. Mark chapter 5, starting in verse 21. But what we're gonna do through this passage of Scripture is hopefully find some comfort in or understand a little bit more in those times when we don't see God show up the way that we think that we want to. And so what I want to challenge you guys to do this morning is to picture in your mind for a second something that either you're waiting on or that you've asked God for and you just haven't seen it happen yet. And you may not have to take very long to find that because we're all going through stuff all the time. But as I was getting ready to do this message 2 weeks ago, if you guys were here, Rudy did a sermon that was very similar to this. Where he shared some pretty deep stuff. And so as I was sitting there that week listening to that sermon, I'd already written this one, just for the record. Like, I already wrote this. Anyways, but 2 weeks ago, I'm sitting there listening in the sermon, and I'm thinking, oh no, like this is the exact same thing. Not the exact same, it's very similar to what I want to talk about, and what I've already planned. And so I struggled with that, and I prayed through it, and I was like, you know what, though? If God's laying into his heart that we need to hear this, and we didn't talk about it at the same time he's doing this in my heart, then that must mean that we need to hear about it. Does that make sense? So I'm just going to proceed with that. Is that cool? Good. I didn't prepare anything else. So, all right. So, Mark chapter 5, verse 21. Jesus is in the midst of his ministry. If you want to catch up to this point, read from the beginning of Mark chapter 5, but please not right now. So, verse 21 says, Jesus got into the boat again. He went back to the other side of the lake where a large crowd gathered around him on the shore. Then a leader of the local synagogue whose name was Jairus arrived. And when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet and he pleaded fervently with him. He said, my little daughter is dying. Please come and lay your hands on her, heal her so that she can live. And Jesus went with him, and the people followed, crowding around him. Now, a woman in the crowd had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding. She had suffered a great deal from many doctors, and over the years had spent everything she had to pay them. She hadn't gotten any better. In fact, she'd only gotten worse. She had heard about Jesus, so she came up behind him through the crowd, and she touched his robe, for she thought to herself, if I can just touch his robe, I'll be healed. Immediately the bleeding stopped, and she could feel in her body that she had been healed of her terrible condition. Now Jesus realized at once that healing power had gone out from him, so he turned around and said, who touched me? His disciples said to him, look at this crowd pressing around you. How can you ask who touched me? But he kept on looking around to see who had done it. Then the frightened woman, trembling at the realization of what had happened to her, came and fell to her knees in front of him and told him what she had done. And he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Your suffering's over. Okay, so pause here in the story and break this down a little bit. What the story is representing, or what we find in the stories, we have a couple people that are having problems that are occurring around the same time that Jesus is visiting. And first we get introduced to Jairus. And Jairus hears that Jesus is in town. We next find out that Jairus has a problem, and so he wants to go to Jesus to have Jesus help him fix it. Now, Jairus' problem is a life and death situation. And sometimes we need something from Jesus that only Jesus can do, right? So those things I'm talking about are like, you have that loved one that's sick, right? The interview that you need because you drastically need that job to change your financial situation around, but you know that like 20 other people are going for that same job as well. That relationship that you have, whether it's a marital relationship or something like that's falling apart, it's crumbling, it's sputtering, it doesn't seem to be getting any better. Or that person in your life that you may know that needs to turn their life around, but they just are in the cycle of making bad decision after decision after decision. These things that only Jesus can take care of. So Jairus, having a similar problem, asks Jesus, and Jesus agrees to go with him. And maybe you've been in that situation where you've had that major problem, or whatever it is, and you pray, you plead in prayer, and you feel that, you know the feeling I'm talking about, where you can just feel like, he's here. Like, I feel that presence of him. And then you think, all right, let's get going. And Jairus must have felt that same way. All right, I brought my problem. Jesus says, yeah, cool, let's go. And so let's go. Well, then Mark tells us we enter the woman in the story. Now, this woman has been menstruating for 12 years. She's been bleeding for 12 years, and that's what we find out. She's been menstruating. Now, hopefully you guys can tell, I'm not a woman. I don't understand, or the only thing I understand about menstruation is what I've had to see my wife go through. There are no personal stories, don't worry, honey. Anyway, but from that time, what I can tell you is this. This is my summation of like having a period. And women, correct me if I'm wrong. It's what I can understand. It's never really a party. Is that cool? Like, I mean, I've known some people that aren't ready to get pregnant yet, and so when that time they're like, woo, yeah, you know, but for the most part, it's not really a party, okay? But this woman's been going through this for 12 years, 12 straight years. And in this culture, when that was that time of the month, like you were considered unclean. You were kind of treated a little bit like an outcast. So based on that, what we can also assume is that this woman has been living like an outcast existence for 12 years. And so she knows also that Jesus is in town, and she's coming to him in faith to have healing done. Now, her intent is to come in and secretly touch his robe because she believes like just touching the hem of his garment, just touching his clothes is enough to heal her. So she manages to get through the crowd close enough to touch the robe, and when she does, she can feel instant healing. So first, a few reminders from as where we're already at in this story, and I think this beautifully portrays a few things. Sorry, I get dry mouth when I'm up here. Anyway, number one, first thing, Jesus cares about your problem. Jairus and the woman both have problems. Again, Jairus has got this life and death situation. The woman, if you want to like say a scale of things that are horrible, he's got life and death. She's got, a physical condition that's been plaguing her, kind of making her an outcast. But what it reminds me of when I read through this is that, for one, as I think you hear a lot, there's no problem that's too big that Jesus can't tackle it. But on the other end of that spectrum, there's no problem too small that he doesn't care. And I have to remind myself of that a lot because I think like I've been in these times where we're in these, you get in like a prayer circle or some sort of environment like that, and someone shares just something really just deep, like that's heavy. And so then I suddenly go like, okay, well, I guess the tires that I need for my Prius aren't that big of a deal, that sort of thing, right? But so you take those moments, you're like, I don't want to be that needy person. I don't want to share that. But the fact of the matter is that it all holds importance to Jesus. There is no problem too small that it doesn't matter to him. So, first thing, Jesus cares about your problem. Second thing, we have to operate in faith. Both Jairus and the woman, they go to Jesus in faith that he's going to perform what they need, that he's going to help them. Now, two different approaches, though, right? You have Jairus that's like, I want to be face-to-face with Jesus. Like, I want his full attention right now. And then the woman, though, she comes with a different approach. She wants to come in privately, in secret, and not be noticed. What I love, and we'll talk about a little bit more in a second, is that Jesus gives her his full attention, even though she doesn't want to be noticed. And what I think we need to be reminded of as we operate in faith, we get intimidated because we see these people that are like, oh man, they're so much more spiritual than I am. Like that sort of thing. Like faith isn't born out of years of intense relationship with the Lord. It doesn't have to be. Faith can be born in an instant. Matthew 17:20 says, I tell you the truth. Jesus says, if you have faith even as small as a mustard seed. I recently started cooking a dish with mustard seeds in it. They're tiny. Anyway, you could say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it would move. Nothing is impossible with faith, even a tiny bit of faith. So Jesus cares about your problem, but we have to operate in faith. And when we do those things, when we bring that to him, number three, Jesus is going to give you his full attention. And I like what it shows here in the text, no matter what position you hold or what you think of yourself or where you're at with that. I mean, we have Jairus, he's top of the social ladder, right? He's a leader of a synagogue, of a church. You think if anyone has Jesus' ear, it's probably this guy. But on the other end, you have a woman. She's an outcast. Total misfit, outcast, whatever you want to call it. And yet, in the story, we see Jesus gives Jairus his attention, and he gives the woman his attention. It doesn't matter. So no matter what you think, if you think you've blown it, or I don't know what it is, or if things are going really well and you feel in a really good spot, Jesus wants to give you his full attention. Job 34:19 says, he shows no partiality to princes. He doesn't favor the rich over the poor, for we are all the work of his hands. Amen? We're all his creation. So, picking it up, the woman touches Jesus' robe and is instantly healed. Jesus feels healing power go from him and suddenly says aloud, who touched me? Now I love this. I love the disciples in the story because they are so you and I, right? The disciples are like, their reaction is like, what do you mean who touched you? Do you not see this crowd around you? I mean, it's in Luke. Luke chapter 8 tells the same story, and it describes the crowd this way in verse 42 of chapter 8. It says that the crowd almost crushed him. That's how dense this crowd was. How many of you guys have ever been to a rock show, a rock concert before? Yeah? Okay. So my wife and I really, for a long time, I still like it, had a passion for kind of like metal, screamo music. Everybody likes that. Anyway, we would go to these shows that were in these tiny little tight venues and spaces, and inevitably these kind of shows, mosh pits would break out. Anybody know what a mosh pit is? Anybody ever been in a mosh pit before? Cool. Anyway, so for those of you who don't know, is my video, hopefully I'll throw up here. So this is an example of a mosh pit. And check out the dude with the backpack at the bottom. That guy's got some moves. Anyway, yeah. Look at him get after it. Anyway, so this sort of things would happen. Now, my role in the mosh pit, when these broke out, is standing on the fringe as these guys are doing their thing behind me, and I'm like hovering over my little 5'2" bride, like taking knees and elbows and shoulders. Now, later on, she was like, no, I want to get in this, so she was like pushing people back in too. But for a while, like I would sit there and I would just take all the abuse to my backside. And it would be like if I was at one of these shows, just, and all of a sudden, like, who touched me? And like Maggie would probably be like, what are you talking about? Right? And that's what the disciples are doing here. What do you mean, who touched you? Now, what's interesting, though, is that Jesus didn't ask who touched me because he didn't know. Jesus knew who touched him. What he was doing in this situation was he was giving the woman an opportunity to take something that he had done for her in private and share it publicly. And that's another thing I think is beautiful about this story as we read it, and it's a good reminder for us, is that we have to be sharing our stories, our testimonies, the things that Jesus has done in our lives with other people. Why? Because it builds faith. It instills faith for other people when we share our stories. And a lot of times we want to just kind of keep those things tucked away, or we think like, it's an insignificant thing. But I've been in spaces where people share their stories, their testimonies of what the Lord has done, and it has helped me through tough spots before. It needs to be shared. So as a reminder, take that step out, share with each other what the Lord's doing in your life, because it's all important, it matters, and it truly could have an impact on someone else. And I think in this moment in the story, the person who needed to see this woman publicly come forward to see what had happened to her was Jairus. Because we pick it up in verse 35, and it says, while Jesus was still speaking to this woman, messengers arrived from the home of Jairus, the leader of the synagogue, and they told him, your daughter's dead. There's no use troubling the teacher now. But Jesus overheard him, and he said, don't be afraid, just have faith. Let's pause there again. Can you imagine being in Jairus' position through all this? I've seen this so many times in my life where I've asked Jesus for a miracle. I felt that he was with me, that it was like, come on, it's go time. And so I'm like, let's get a move on. And then seemingly there's a stall out. It's like nothing happens. It's like he's taking his time, and you start asking that question. I don't understand what you're doing. I have stuff going on in my life right now. Like, we have one of our kids at home, again, love him to pieces, but it feels like I'm dealing with the emotions of a teenager. Like, he's always bummed out. There's always, no matter what the cool thing we can do is, it's always not quite good enough. He wakes up in the morning with that disposition, that sort of thing. And we've been praying for a while, like, Lord, my wife and I aren't like that. Like, how do we bring joy into his life? And it's taking a while. I know, people that marital stuff, it's sputtering, it's difficult. Or people that are crying out like, Lord, I want to hear your voice, but I'm not hearing it. It doesn't have to be life and death. There's all the stuff, everyday stuff. It's like, I don't understand. And I bet nobody knew that feeling better than Jairus did in that moment. I mean, he's in the physical presence of Jesus. He had Jesus lockstep coming with him to help his daughter. And then all of a sudden he decides to stop and talk to this woman. And I don't know about you, but if I was Jairus, my first instinct would have been to say to Jesus, when I got that news, Jesus, you took too long. She died. I mean, that's what the story says. She died. Can you imagine how devastated Jairus must have been? And the sad reality is, you don't have to imagine. A lot of you don't have to imagine. You're living in this right now. You have lived in this situation. But how frustrated and defeated he must have felt in that moment. If only he'd walked a little faster, right? My problem was more important. My daughter was dying. And this woman, she wasn't dying. Like, did you have to take your time there? And I don't know about you guys, if you can relate, this is me talking, just Mike talking, like sometimes I get so me-focused on my problems that I fail to acknowledge the victories and successes of what other people have done for what they should be, which is encouragement to my own faith. And instead, it's messed up, but instead, I almost harbor a little bit of resentment towards the Lord when I hear that stuff, right? Like, oh, your family member was healed? Cool, mine died anyway. Or, wow, you're celebrating 30 years of wonderful, blissful marriage. Mine's really struggling right now. Good for you. You know, and we take that sort of stuff that should be encouragement and building up our faith, and we twist that stuff into, like some sort of resentment or bitterness. And we need to be cautioned against doing that sort of stuff. But I love the story because what it shows is that Jesus wants to stop and take the time for all of our problems. They all matter to him, no matter how big or small they are. And when Jairus got word from the messenger basically tells him, he says, there's no use bothering Jesus now. He's basically saying, let's accept defeat. When that relationship isn't mending, right? When we're waiting on something from the Lord, when we see that person continue to make poor mistakes. Again, I don't know whatever it is for you guys. I mean, maybe you're in a spot in your life, it could be, you know, you're waiting to find that special someone in your life and you haven't yet, you know, and you desperately want that. Or I don't know, you're waiting for a child to come back to you, whatever the case may be. And it's not happening. It's easy to feel defeated. And you might be sitting here right now in your seat this morning feeling defeated. And what I love is in verse 36 of chapter 5, Jesus says to Jairus, and I truly believe he's saying it to some people in this room this morning that need to be reminded, he says, don't be afraid and just have faith. And I think Jairus needed to see this miracle that Jesus performed for the woman so he could keep his faith that Jesus still in control of the situation. And he's still in control of whatever your situation is too. So let's finish out our story here. It says in verse 37, Jesus stopped the crowd, wouldn't let anyone go with him except Peter, James, and John. This is him going to the house of Jairus. It says, when they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw much commotion and weeping and wailing. And he went inside and he asked, why all this commotion and weeping? The girl's not dead. She's only asleep. Now the crowd laughed at him, but he made them all leave. And he took the girl's father and mother and his 3 disciples to the room where the girl was lying, and holding her hand, he said to her, Talitha cum, which means, little girl, get up. And the girl, who was 12 years old, immediately stood up and walked around, and they were overwhelmed and totally amazed. One thing that I love here is it says Jesus goes to Jairus' house, and there's a lot of commotion going on. The word chosen in this translation is commotion. We have this stuff going on in our lives, and that's what it can feel like. It can feel like turmoil. It can feel like commotion. It can feel like mixed emotions and feelings. And we need to let Jesus come into the situation because the first thing he does is silence the commotion. And he can do that in your situation as well. And I think that there's another interesting parallel, and I love that Mark saved this kind of reveal until the very last verse of this story. It says, the girl, Jairus' daughter, is 12 years old. Now remember, back to the beginning of the story, how long had the woman been suffering for? 12 years, right? And what that reminds me of, what I think is really important to remember is that no matter what situation you're in life, it's important not to become complacent and to just have faith. You have Jairus, 12 years. His daughter's been around for 12 years, so his household has been filled with the sounds of little girl laughter, and you know, things are going well. His life is good. He's got a good job, a good social status, that sort of thing. But in an instant, it crumbles. It falls apart, right? We need to have the faith and not become complacent in those situations to be ready for when that stuff occurs. But then on the other end, you've got the woman, 12 years, outcast, miserable existence, right? And in an instant, she's healed. Our God works miracles in an instant. He can. He's capable of it. And we need to have the faith to be able to be in either of those situations. That's why sharing our testimonies of things that are happening are so important as well with other people. Because we need to be building up that faith to be able to handle either of those circumstances. And they're happening all around us. So I want to close by addressing one last thing that I touched on earlier. In this particular story, everybody gets healed. Everybody kind of gets what they wanted or what they asked for. But what about those times that doesn't happen, right? Most of us have experienced that time that we lost that family member anyway, that marriage fell through, finances continued to be shaky and crumble, we had to lose our car, our house, whatever the case may be. I hope that through this we can remember that God has a plan for each of us, and it's never purposeless. So if God shows up perceivably to you, or if he's not showing up in the timing that you want, it's not without purpose. Isaiah 55:8 says, "My thoughts are nothing like your thoughts, and my ways are beyond anything you can imagine." I'm going to close with this story for me. Right before Thanksgiving last year, my grandpa, 81 years old, went from being completely, mentally intact and physically capable. 81 years old, this is just an example. This is the guy at 81 that straps a gas-powered leaf blower to his back, climbs up a 10-foot ladder onto his roof, and is blowing leaves out of the gutter, right? Like, he's that kind of guy. I wouldn't do that. Anyway, but he went from that to being on death's doorstep, needing a quadruple bypass heart surgery, bleeding internally, and kidney failure, and losing his mental facilities within an 8-week stretch at the end of last year. And my family and my extended family, all being believers, prayed with so much confidence for healing for him. And there were a couple of times when we thought healing was happening, because he went home, or he got out of the hospital twice. One time to go home, and the second time to go to kind of a rehabilitation thing so that he could eventually go home. Both times it only lasted a couple of days, and then he wound up in the hospital again in even worse condition. On the morning that he made the decision to be taken off of life support, a couple weeks before Thanksgiving last year, my wife and I were driving on our way down to Southern Oregon so that I could see him again, because they said, he's going to be taken off life support, but he'll be around for probably another day or two, is what they estimated. So my wife and I are on our way down to Grants Pass so I could see him again. On our way down, in the middle of the trip, my mom had called me just to kind of give me an update on him and stuff like that. And she had told me, I think as a way of encouragement, she had said, "Hey, last night, I was with Grandpa, and, slipping in and out of consciousness and being lucid, he specifically asked for you." He said, "Where's Mike?" And my grandpa's got a lot of family. So to me, that was like, whew, "Where's Mike?" And my mom said, "He's coming." 45 minutes before Maggie and I made it to Southern Oregon, I got a phone call that my grandpa passed away. And that hurt. That was tough. I was really upset. I was in this space, in the car driving down there, where I was like, "Lord, I don't get it. I don't understand what you're doing. Like, why couldn't you have hung on for one more hour? One more hour so that I could have seen him again." And furthermore, God, we prayed for healing. He could have lived for another 15 years. This is somebody who's a pillar in my family. 15 years or so he could have lived for. God, why didn't you bring healing? I don't understand what you're doing. Interestingly, though, about 2 weeks before he had passed, a family member that I have, we had a little bit of a falling out, I guess is the best way to put it. And if you guys know me at all, I don't like conflict or controversy at all. I really steer away from it. But this person kind of stuck their nose into my family where I thought it was not appropriate, and I called them out on it, and they did not receive that well, and I didn't receive their not receiving it well. And so we essentially, it really damaged our relationship. I have a lot of bitterness. I was upset, very upset about it. And I thought, you know what? We live so far apart in proximity, we're not going to see each other for years. So I guess we're going to sweep this under the rug. It's always going to bother me. I'll probably just see them at, maybe a family reunion once every 15 years and be like, "Hey, whatever." Well, my grandpa passed away, so 2 weeks later, we both ended up at his memorial service together. And after the service was over, this person came up to me with tears in their eyes, and they just looked at me and they said, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I said for the things that were done. It was wrong of me. There was, total repentance there, and I apologize for my part of it too. And we hugged it out, and there was forgiveness there. And I realized in that moment, and sometimes we don't see things. Actually, I didn't realize it in the moment. I realized later, sometimes we don't see in the moment, is that we prayed for healing in my grandpa's situation. It didn't turn out to be what I thought it would look like, but God did bring healing through my grandpa's passing. He brought healing to my relationship with this person. He brought healing to my family members, and there's been a ripple effect down the line. And truth be told, God healed my grandpa. He's in heaven. He's whole. He's restored. And he's with Jesus. So, while we may not always understand what he's doing, while we may not always understand in whatever your situation is, again, that why he's taking his time, why he's not responding in the time frame that you thought, I hope you guys can find some comfort in at least knowing that he's still in control and that he cares about your problem. You need to have the faith to be able to bring it to him and know that he is going to give you that attention, again, even if it's not in your time frame. But in the meantime, as we wait on the Lord, to be sharing our testimonies with each other, to be building up each other's faith. It's so important. This whole concept of community in church, actually, unfortunately, was foreign to me. Ian and I've grown up my whole life in church up until a couple years ago, but I'm finding it now. And it's so important, which is why, when Jen mentions the small groups and things like that, get plugged in. It's important that we build up each other's faith. I'm going to invite the worship team to come back up here and just close out by saying, again, with confidence, God is present. He has a plan, and he causes everything to work together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose for them. Amen? Amen.